Martians out there, and he fights him, and he gets killed, and he's laid out on the tarmac as the plane gets away. So he paves the way for them to get away. So we have this production meeting. Tim Burton isn't in the meeting, but it's the producers and the department heads. We have this meeting, and so Wynn brings up the point about why do these kids have to be shooting guns? Why? The stereotypical thing that they're getting to show. Why do they have to be shooting guns?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he brings that point up. And my thing is, the whole thing for Jim Brown's character in this film is to get back to Washington. So why does he sacrifice his life? And the producer says, you mean for the white folks, right? And I said, yeah. Why does he sacrifice his life and give up his whole goal and get back? And somebody says, I think one of the other producers said, well, Tim is a fan of the films of the 50s, and, this is done in those, and this is a kind of a tribute to those films. And I said, yeah, well, that's why we started making films in the 60s. So we could live to the end of the picture.
Right.
And so we get this place in D.C. So anyway, we shoot the scene up near what is the Howard Theater in that area in D.C.
Locations, go to 2.
Where's that set person that's not answering?
Go for location.
This is Kokayi Ampah, location manager, producer, director.
This is Alison Taylor, location manager.
And you are listening to
Locations on 2.
And this is Dodd Vickers, your host for Locations on 2, the podcast that takes you around the world on set with location professionals in the film, television, and commercial industries. Find out more by visiting locationsonto.com. You can also find me online at doddvickers.com. Locations on 2 is brought to you by the Location Managers Guild International, a global organization of location professionals in the film, television, and commercial industries. Find out more by visiting them online at locationmanagers.org. And this is the second and final part of our 2-part interview with 2 people, Kokayi Ampah, the first African-American location manager and a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Also joining us is Alison Taylor, the most recognized female African-American location manager. And together they've managed everything from the A-Team and Knight Rider to Shawshank Redemption, Underground Railroad, Straight Outta Compton, and much more. It's time now to switch on over to the back channel where the real work gets done on set. Locations on 2.
And that's how I got my first 3 days, toward the union. And then...
and you said, sure, right?
I said, sure, exactly. And it's funny because Gary was hilarious. I knew nothing. And I remember Gary leaving me. It was probably just stage or something. Mm-hmm. But Gary left me with a walkie and said he had to go. And he said, listen, if you hear him say locations, just push this button, say go for locations.
That's all it is.
And then try to help them with whatever it is they need.
Right.
And I said, okay, and that was how I started, because I just started pushing the button, and then they would say, we need X, Y, and Z. And I said, well, hold on, let me try to help you with that. And I was grown enough to be able to figure things out, and that's how I did it. So I ended up getting maybe 11 days on barbed wire, and then that fall. So that was the end of 95, because I quit. That summer I quit. I had my job at Lilly for a year. And so I quit. And then Gary referred me, or Kristen referred me, to a woman named Karen White. Kokayi, do you remember Karen White?
Yeah.
So Karen White happened to call Gary, and desperately she was doing a TV series. It was called Courthouse. It had Jennifer Lewis. I'll never forget it, but it didn't last long. But she was needing an assistant. And Gary said, well, I've got somebody over here. She's not in the union, but she's smart. She can figure. And Karen took me, and I got the rest of my days on her show. And that was pretty much how I got in. So I was working with Wayne Middleton when I heard about Kokayi, which would have been the beginning of 96. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I started writing him.
So I grew up in Georgia and lived a little while in Florida before moving back to Georgia. loved film, took film classes in college, but never thought there was any way I'd ever work in the industry. And here you are living in California. Did you have any interest in getting into the film industry before this kind of casual introduction to it? Or did you?
Well, and here's the thing. I didn't grow up here. I started in Los Angeles, but I grew up in Indianapolis.
Right.
So the film business meant nothing. As it happened, my roommate that I was referencing, Kathy, when we were at Purdue, I'll never forget, she was an electrical engineering major. And then she discovered television. And I remember she started taking all her electives because back in the day, you weren't really about switching majors,
right.
you know. So she started taking all her electives in television, and she got a summer internship with one of those local stations in Chicago. And so she loved it. So she had come to Los Angeles, you know, trying to be in the film business. And I had zero thoughts about the film industry. And like I said, I was just visiting her for lunch. But then I realized that the location department actually was the skill set that I had. Like if you think of, and all of us know, if you look at each location as an event, it's like planning multiple events in the course of a show, at least the logistical side of it. So I fell right into it. And I had spent, prior to coming to California, I had spent 5 years as an international tour director. And so I thought, oh, this is great. I can just start taking movie people, you know, around the world. And I'll just go all over the world doing, you know, TV or movies. But then I had kids and I didn't go anywhere until
right.
in the more recent years. But that's how I came in. And so that summer of 96 is when I got to work with Kokayi for the first time. And that was on BAPS. And as it happens, I was pregnant when I went to, I wasn't pregnant when I met him. Well, I was pregnant, but maybe I didn't know it.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to think. Yeah. Oh, no, I probably wasn't. I think Kokayi, when did you do Mars Attacks? I want to say we maybe met in January or February or something.
You know, I can't pull it together. I do remember, though, when you were coming to work with me, this is when I was like you say, ending Mars Attacks and beginning BAPS, because I was taking over BAPS. They were already going. I was taking it over.
Right.
And we met in the Mars Attack office. And this guy came up to me and says, there's a pregnant woman over in your office waiting for you. And I was like, who are they talking about? What are you talking about? and it was Alison. and so, yeah.
It was like, because, okay, so Dodd, you can appreciate this. Now here I've sent the man these letters. I really wanted to work with him. He's the only name I'm hearing that everybody's like, hey, have you met Kokayi? And so I meet him. When I meet him, I wasn't pregnant, or at least I didn't know it yet, but I'm sure I was not pregnant when I met him. And then a few months later, he's calling me, and I was not going to say no, even though I was pregnant. I was like, I'm not missing my chance to go work.
Oh, for sure.
You know, for Kokayi. So, but I didn't mention that by the way, I'm pregnant. But we got that show done. It was tough.
Oh, yeah.
Pregnant too, but that was but we got that show done. And
I can remember us walking around the LAX.
Oh,
and I think that wore both of us out.
That was the longest day in history. That was like a 19-hour day. And I remember sitting on the floor of Terminal 2 with you at the end of the day. Like, my feet were swollen. I was like, I can't do another thing. Like, this has really worn me out. But I always loved that scene in that movie, though, because I thought it was hilarious when Halle Berry meets LL Cool J in the airport. That was rough. Just like all that Beverly Hills work in July.
Yeah.
You know, in the heat.
Yeah. She was a trooper. She hung in there. We got it done.
Yeah. I did hang in there, but yeah, so that's what happened with me, Dot. I fell into it. I did not I didn't have any background or interest or anything, you know.
Right. Well, that's one of the things I think that and anyone else that listens to the podcast certainly knows that I find so interesting is the really diverse backgrounds that we have. Here in the locations department, very few of us have any kind of film background. I was the hotel manager at the Ritz-Carlton before I got in.
I remember you telling me that.
Yeah. And, I value what I learned there and I apply it every day to what we do. But very few of us,
exactly.
It's the skill set you bring to the table that makes you good at your job. And film school doesn't teach you that. It's not.
No.
I think it was Mike Fantasia that was saying you don't go to film school to be a location manager. You may go to film school and later find that you really enjoy locations and all the different things that we do. You start off as an assistant location manager, dealing primarily with logistics and some early contracts and things like that. But, you don't even know anything about the creative side, that we'd like to brag about, but that comes a little bit later.
Well, what I think is also interesting about what you're saying about, you don't go to film school to do locations. I think that what's interesting about what we do as well is that while our world is not necessarily the film thing on the logistics side, but we also have to have such an understanding of all the other departments.
Exactly.
The other departments don't necessarily have to have an understanding of what we do. But in order for us to do our jobs well, we have to understand all those needs of all the other departments. And I always found that interesting. So you end up getting a little film school education just by doing our job at the same time that we're doing public relations and event planning and everything else that we do.
But they'll tell you what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, the other departments. Yeah,
you're supposed to. Exactly. But but that's what prepares you, though, if you do want to produce or you do want to do something else because you have a good idea. I mean, as you get further into location management, and especially in the features, well, they'll send you a script and you break it down, before your interview. You might notice things like, oh, there's a lot of night here, or there's a lot of pages, or there's a few pages in this bathroom.
Right.
Are they, so when you go into the meeting and you have your notes, you're saying, so this bathroom in this scene, are you planning to build that,
right,
or you want to find that practical? And a lot of times, the people you're interviewing haven't even thought that in depth of the script.
Mm-hmm.
It could be maybe a designer, but it's probably a producer and a director, and that producer, maybe they don't even have a unit manager or anybody on who's done a day out of days or anything else. But I know when I was interviewing, I would do my own little day out of days, and especially on certain locations, big ones or nights or whatever. And I'd say, okay, well, I would just say they're going to shoot 3 pages a day. And I'd count the pages up and divide it by 3. And 3 maybe is even a large number on a feature for pages a day. And I said, well, you got approximately such and such number of days. I mean, it sounded like you knew what you were talking about, right? And
right.
and that's what the business is all about. It's smoke and mirrors. It's perception. And so they feel, oh, wow, yeah, you really thought about this. And I'd come in there with my little breakdown all typed up, and I'd pass it out at the beginning of the interview. Well, can we keep this? And I said, well, maybe not. Somebody's going to do this work for you, but I just wanted you to know. Or at least, or else they would see me referencing it in the meeting.
Right.
And then, wow, but you have to do that. And especially because the big conversation comes in that meeting is how big your department is going to be. That's always my question. What do you have in the budget for my department?
Right.
How many people? Blah blah blah.
And it's never
it wouldn't
enough.
necessarily be my salary so much as it was the department first. Then when you get to my salary, that would definitely come up. But what was the makeup? What did you see as the make? Because they always underestimate the job
Absolutely.
that we do.
Yeah. I'm having that meeting on Monday.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm having that meeting on Monday, as a matter of fact.
There you go.
Yeah.
So tell them I said to give you the people you need.
Right.
Exactly. I was going to say, that's something Kokayi always taught me when I was managing, when I would be talking about getting a show or whatever's the next thing. And he would say, well, make sure they give you what you need. And I got beat up on that a lot because I was so busy thinking, if I don't take this job, I might, who knows when I'll get the next job offer, you know, and I have kids. I have to,
Right.
I have to pay bills. I don't want to, you know, there's this paranoia that I had for so long, and I just wanting to get to a place where I could actually choose to accept a job or not. So I wouldn't fight as hard for what I needed. And then it would turn around and bite me because
it always does, for sure.
You know, you want to get the job done, and the only way to get the job done well is with the resources. But having said that, it's really funny because while Kokayi was talking about those TV shows and how there really was like one person, you know, or one manager, an assistant, whatever, it is funny what we used to do TV with.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
There used to be like hardly anybody on the. I remember when we were doing Alias, Mike Harrow and I, and it was like there were like 5 people total: 2 managers, 2 assistants, or 3 assistants. It was 1 closer, and then I had myself and 1 person, and Mike had himself and 1 person, and we alternated. And that show was, you know, an espionage show with all sorts of night work, and we were supposed to be all over the world, and literally 5 people were holding it down for that whole thing. Cut to when Mike and I did Southland, we had, you know, probably 9 people. By then you've got a coordinator, you've got a team of 5 or 6 just trying to pull off the everyday work, plus a couple of people on the scout team. You know, it's funny, the progression of resources, as in human resources, to get a job done anymore.
Yeah, you know, and I was telling you about when there was just 1 location person. There was never a location person on the set. So another part of your job was the next day figuring out what they'd torn up. You know, that you had to answer for, because it was never, you know, because therefore leaving a company to their own defenses meant, we can go over there, we can put a camera over there, we can do, you know, this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
Whereas a location person would have said, no, you can't, or let me go check with somebody or something. But, you know, they were just wild. And so you had another job, which is really mending a lot of fences after the company shot. But, you know, television now is nothing like television then. I mean, the storylines, these are mini movies on each episode. I came back to TV to do a series called Karen Cisco. And it was based on the film Out of Sight, the Jennifer Lopez movie Out of Sight.
Oh, sure. Yeah, right.
Where she was a FBI or some kind of agent, her and Clooney, I guess it was, maybe. Right. But anyway, so this series was based on that, and it was a total different world in terms of it was so hard. It was so hard. It was a matter of because one, they were shooting it really like features. And, you know, I had a director who had been shooting and working in Canada for an episode. It was a night scene in a cemetery. Well, there's a few cemeteries that you can shoot in, you know, and everybody knows them. And then it's the scenes at night. Well, he lived in Santa Monica, so he wanted to shoot in a cemetery in Santa Monica at night. I said, that's not going to happen. Okay? Here's the cemeteries. We've already gone through this. Here's the cemetery. And he said to me, and this is with me, him, the producer, and the UPM in this meeting. He says to me, that's why I go to Canada to shoot, because da-da-da-da-da.
Wow.
And then I'm like, you know, what, you live in Santa Monica and you got to travel 15 miles to go into Los Angeles, and that's better than traveling 1,500 miles away from your family? Shoot, what are you talking about?
Right.
So that was my last episode on that anyway, because I got a call to do Coach Carter, and the producer and unit manager had been fired that I came on the show with. So at that point, I didn't feel I had any allegiance to stay. So I never packed up an office so fast in all my life. I packed that office up. And at that point, I had my own parking space on the lot at Universal. I walked a new location manager and I said, here's your parking space. Here's your... and I was...
Have fun with this.
And I was gone. I was gone. TV is in terms of practical hard work, is so much harder. But
absolutely,
features, of course, you're asked to do bigger things and accomplish bigger tasks, you know. And, so, I mean, they each had their own degree of difficulty, but TV in terms of having to really turn on a dime is a lot harder. A lot harder for me.
The pace.
Yeah. The pace, yeah. I never did commercials. I did maybe 2 or 3 commercials in my whole career, and never a still shoot. But TV, music videos, television, TV movies, and I did the mini series of The Women of Brewster Place. I think it was Oprah's first production, possibly. I did that, and I didn't do the series. And then, and then feature.
Yeah, Alison, we were talking about Kokayi being the first African-American male location manager. You're certainly the most prominent African-American female out there doing location management today. Kokayi and I were trying to talk about who might have been the first female African-American location manager. And I'm not sure if you know, Alison, but who did you say you thought it was, Kokayi?
Well, as far as I know, it might be Pamela DePella.
I think it's Pamela.
Yeah, and I of course I reached out to Pamela to ask her that. And of course, she said yes, it was. And then
of course she did.
And then but I know that because she worked with me on a couple of things, but I know that she managed and she had been working. You know what? Wait a minute. I'm trying to think of what her name is. But anyway, and then there was Elisa, because who managed. And then Elisa Ann Conant. And there was a young lady, I'm trying to think of her name. She married a driver and retired to raise her son. She worked with me on Poetic Justice, her and Elisa. But I met her when I was doing In the Line of Fire. Oh God, I can't think of her. She was wonderful. She was one of the people who first started Mike Arrow. Actually.
Yeah, I know Elisa Ann is listed with you, but I'm not seeing
Elisa Ann and Pamela DePella. But I'm trying to think of who.
If you're on IMDb, look up Morales. Her last name was Morales. Look up In the Line of Fire.
Okay, let me take a quick look here.
And the location department. Hopefully she's listed.
I'm kind of always on IMDb when I'm doing these. So, Alison, I wanted to talk a little bit about your experience. We talked about Kokayi's early experience being introduced as the location manager, as an African-American man, kind of breaking into that role in the business. And to this day, if you look at it, it's still a male-dominated industry. But I did want to get your perspective on what it was like to come in as, an early African-American woman stepping into this role in a industry dominated by men.
I think that the challenges that I had as a Black woman were probably more challenges as being a woman.
Okay.
It's an interesting thing because I am a twofer, if you're trying to check some boxes.
Right.
But generally speaking, I think that Black men have more just day-to-day issues than Black women. I think that women in and of themselves just are caught in a bind with just being in a man's world, in particular a white man's world, in any industry, but this industry has always been that. And then when you finally are a manager and you're not only a woman, but a Black woman sitting in the scout van with all the white men, it's just kind of it's just one of those things. And it's a weirdness that you're sort of excluded from certain things because they're in their own little world in their conversations and everything. And there's always this sort of thing that you're trying to figure out how to connect or how to fit in or how to be included, but maybe you don't even really want to be included, but that their jokes and their everything are really how they're getting the next job,
mm-hmm,
and they're not thinking about you. You're just kind of like an outsider sitting in the van for the most part. And that's just the reality of being it. And I don't know that I ever really dissected it from Black and female as much in this job. And of course, like with the Teamsters, the drivers, they're always, even though those are our brothers and sisters in the union, there's certain departments that just always seem to just ignore you and your request and your authority until you got to a point that you just had to assert it, you know? I will say that I know there's a lot of Black folks in the industry that get pigeonholed into Black projects. I didn't have a history of that until I started probably, I don't know, I did training day. And after training day was on my resume, people thought, oh, she can do, you know, the hood and deal with the gangbangers. And then I did, you know, Southland. I did Straight Outta Compton. And I found that there was a moment where I did a Disney ABC family show called Lincoln Heights. That was a cop show, but that it was a Black family. So there was a moment when I sort of started getting those, but I was never like on the BET circuit or anything like that. But I think that was more because of my relationship that I had built with like the gangbanger relationship than it was just because I was Black. I do know that there are people who've hired me for one of those things and they don't think about me again until they have another project for the South LA or Compton or Watts or something. But Kokayi was never pigeonholed. And when I was working with him, I was working on the project that he did, which were not pigeonholed into being a Black project. I don't know, but it is weird though. I want to say this. It is weird that you just are in the office, like you're the Black person, or you're, you know, like you walk through a whole department, a whole production office, and it's just like, where are the people of color in this space, you know? And if you see somebody, you're just dying to meet them by the coffee pot and be like, "What's up? What do you do?" You know, there's a reality to that.
Sure.
You know, I've been fortunate in my last few projects to work on some things where people are really making a point about diversity and inclusion. And to your whole point about me being probably the most prominent, that's kind of funny to me. I'm trying to process that. I think I'm just the most visible African American.
In television, what's the young lady's name that was doing?
There's Kelly.
Kelly, that's what I'm thinking of. Kelly, yeah.
And that's here in LA, and she was doing not Silicon Valley, but one of those.
She did do Silicon Valley.
Yeah, she was doing Silicon Valley, and you know, but I think because I'm on the LMGI board, and because I was fortunate, I won a couple of those COLAs, which are the California On Location Awards here. California has their own location awards. And I know you're in Atlanta, Dodd, but
yeah,
those put me on the map. I'm Project Greenlight.
Well, you know, it's funny. I use that simply because John Rakich and I were joking about it, and he said you'll have to mention Project Greenlight.
Because it's just funny that I was on Project Greenlight. Like, it's still just funny. In fact, one of the location managers in Atlanta, Kyle Henshaw.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I know Kyle very well.
Every time I see him, he just smiles at me and says, Project Greenlight. And he introduces me to anyone. He says, she was on Project Greenlight. It makes
sounds
him
like Kyle.
so happy that I was on that show. And I think that's just insane to me. But
yeah, Kyle's a good friend, of course, as you know.
Yeah,
so.
Well, he just cracks up. He just loved that I was on Project Greenlight. But those few things, I think, just made me more visible. But then I started thinking about it, and I was like, I could probably name all of the Black women in LA, and I'm just meeting a lot of them in Atlanta, you know. But I don't know what our representation is in the rest of the country.
I would think in Chicago there are a number. I don't know about a number, but I do know there are two or three, and then I mean, in terms of now, if you're talking about women per se, I don't know how many women there are. I know there's some guys in Chicago, and one guy who's actually in the academy.
In New Orleans.
In New Orleans.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is, in terms of being pigeonholed or stereotyped in the job, I was fortunate enough to work with some producers who took me on shows wherever they went, whatever they did. Mm-hmm. So I had like a unit manager, co-producer named Paul Deason. Or like, and as a matter of fact, he and I went around the world actually a little bit and doing shows. But he was always the unit manager or associate producer or whatever on shows. And when I did my short film, and I directed my short film, he worked for me at a big hefty price as my first AD and co-executive producer. And the price was 2 quarts of chili. So
that's it. That is expensive. I can't even get that chili.
But they would take, if they were doing that show, and that was, for the time that I worked with Eastwood and them, the 6-7 shows I did with them, whatever show was next, you were doing it. And then David Lester, who was another UPM who I did A White Men Can't Jump with, but then he went on to do Shawshank, and he went on to do Cobb, which was baseball player. And, I was the guy. So it didn't matter what the subject matter was. They would just say, this is our team, and I would go with them. So I was fortunate that way. So, yeah. But other times you get pigeonholed, and I guess other people get pigeonholed. I remember when I was working at Stephen Cannell, I guess I was doing 18. And there was a guy who was, I won't name his name, but it was very prominent in the location world. And he said to me, I don't think this is a job for women. I don't think women can really do this job. And I may just shook my head or something, but in my head I said, I wonder if they had that conversation about black people too. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I don't think this is a job for black people. So when I heard that, it wasn't like I was, oh yeah, because it's like any kind of joke about any different person, especially for a black person. Okay, if you're telling this joke about them, I know you tell jokes about me.
Exactly.
Exactly. And there was another thing, Alison, I'll tell you this joke. So going through a whole company, because how many companies have I been on, and I was the only black person, let alone a department head. And see, that's what location managers have to demand, that they are treated like a department head.
Oh my goodness, I know.
And they got to make that clear that you are a department head. I know during the prep you work with the designer, and people think you're part of that, and then that shifts more over to production. But we are a hybrid department. And in terms of what Alison mentioned about us having to work with and know what the needs are for different departments.
Right.
And we are, as managers, we are department heads.
Absolutely.
And therefore, don't have, like, if I got a person on the set, don't decide because you're short for holding traffic that my person's going to hold traffic. Because my person needs to be on a swivel, seeing what's happening, not at some station somewhere. They need to be able to see what's going on. So they're not another PA. They are in the location department. Or don't try and send my people off to do something, and I'm expecting that they're doing something else. And then you have to tell that to your crew, too. Don't let anybody else give you an assignment. Tell them you have to check with me.
Absolutely.
Before they can do it. I don't care who it is that says it to you. Tell them you have, because you're not going to go to a camera assistant and tell them to go somewhere or do something.
Absolutely
without
not.
Dealing with the DP or the first AC or something like that. You know the pecking order. So you have to establish your pecking order with your department. But, but the whole thing about Alison talking about walking through somewhere, and if you do see someone, you like to see them by the cooler, or if you do see him on the set, we give each other nods, like, hey, I recognize you. So on doing, and this is a true story, on doing Shawshank, I had an assistant, and back in the Midwest, there's these restaurants called Friendly's restaurant. Well, we were going for lunch one day, and we were walking down the street, and a black person came, and this is in, I think, it's in Mansfield, Ohio. And this black person walked by, and he and I nodded at each other. Now, this guy is from California, but he's, pretty young. And he says, "Oh, did you know that guy?" I said, "No." He said, "But you guys," I said, "Okay, listen." I said, "I don't tell many people this, but he knows I'm the chosen one."
Oh my
did
God,
you
no,
really?
I swear I did. I swear I did. And he looks at me and his eyes go wide and his mouth goes up. What? I said, "Listen, he knows." And he just recognized that. And that's where I get that nod. So we get into friendlies and we're sitting at a booth. So we're sitting across from each other. So, of course, anybody coming from behind him, I can see.
Right.
And so I see this black person coming up behind him. So when they get up to me, I give him this real regal nod. And I know he's seeing it. And his mouth just goes wide open. Oh my God. So I can't hold it anymore. I said, "Listen, I don't know if it comes out of slavery, where it comes from, but because black people, when we are so glad to see another one of us around in certain instances, we just we give each other a nod of recognition, and that's something that black people do." So anyway, that whole joke it became something, and Paul Deason told Paul Deason about it. So we were in Jordan, and we were sitting out in this desert kind of place, and we were the person who was the caregiver or caretaker of the got this tea, and we were all sitting around talking. And Paul took this shot of me with my hands going like I'm talking, and this guy sitting in traditional garb, and he titled it "The Chosen One Speaks."
I want to see this picture.
So pull this back to this film that I made called Who Are They? And Paul is the AD. The same guy who was my assistant, was from California, but he got out of the business because his father had a metal company. He went to work in his father's business, and he did that for the last 20 some odd years. And so now his father died, and he runs that business, but he always wanted to get back into films. So he came on as a producer on my short film. So I had verification. I told him, "Paul, this is the guy that I did the Chosen One with." And he said, "Yeah, he did that for sure." So anyway, yeah.
It's like the whole Coming to America with Vonnie Curtis Hall and Eddie Murphy.
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah.
It's like, "It is you. It is you."
Right.
Yeah. So.
Well, I'll tell you why I'm always curious about these things. I was raised by some pretty strong women in my life. My dad died. He was killed when I was 19. My mom lost her dad when she was 8. And my mother went on to become the 4th woman to ever graduate from the University of Georgia Veterinary College at a time when you were taking a job away from a guy. That's the way it was looked at. You were taking a man's job by going into school, getting this degree, and graduating. She was raised by her mom, who was a widow when she was 8 years old. My aunt, my grandmother's sister, was a widow. And I knew her because she lived with my grandmother most of her life. She was the first woman police judge in Kentucky. In fact, had Al Capone in her jail at one point. So, growing up with these people as my role models, it was one of the reasons I was interested in being part of the Glorias when we were filming it. These women came up in an era when there was no awareness. There was no one working on their behalf to raise awareness of the mistreatment or the imbalanced treatment of women, and much less African-American women or African-American men until when I was younger. So I always find it very interesting, the challenges that people have had to face, and there's kind of these preconceived notions of what those things might have been. So that's why I asked the question, because I think illustrating what your experience has been is something that can certainly benefit other people coming up now and realizing.
It's interesting you say a preconceived notion, because the reality is it's a funny thing that, and this has all come up recent, in this whole Black Lives Matter movement and everything. But it's interesting because as a Black person or as a woman, you really are just functioning in the same way, your preparation is sort of normal, like how people brush their teeth or do whatever they do to go out in the world. What it is that you're going to deal with just to maneuver in the course of the day. So none of it is shocking. None of it is anything. It's just part of your daily preparation, and how you're handling things. But I always found that, in both instances, you're trying to over prepare, and you're trying to um, uh, just make sure that you're getting through all of it, but every day that what it's going to be like, so it's just part of your daily routine to deal with it. Whereas, and what this whole movement has been talking about, when someone white all of a sudden is the only person in a Black neighborhood or a Black restaurant or something like that, that's a new experience for them. Whereas for us, we're accustomed to it, but there is that joy of being like, oh, they hired another woman, or they got another Black person on the, on the crew, or, you're kind of doing like a little sort of observation the first day of filming, like how many folk are going to be out here?
Exactly.
So, or you're like, ooh, check it out. There's a woman in the camera department. Or, there's a Black, because you'll see Black people in maybe gripping electrics and Teamsters. But then you'll be like, ooh, there's a brother in the camera department.
Right.
Or, when you start seeing them in the other places, like they finally let us creep into these areas, I did that. Was it the Gloria's Dodd, where the key grip was a woman?
Oh, you're right. I had
The key grip was a female.
Yes,
I know it was while I was in Georgia. So yes, it was definitely the Glorious.
Yeah,
because it was not. And I was just like, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
So you just sort of are keeping tally, paying attention to it, but it's not throwing off your day because you're accustomed to operating in that sort of world.
Well, it's interesting, and again, it could be my own confirmation bias, but I like to think that I don't really pay attention to it, that I hire pretty equally across the board without putting much thought into it. But I'm sure that I have at some point. But I'm proud of the fact that I've hired a lot of women, given people the opportunity. But the first question I ask when somebody is recommended to me is, are they good at thinking on their feet? Are they willing to work hard? Do they mind sweating?
Right.
Can they pay attention? Do they listen well? And I don't really care who they are otherwise. I just, I'm happy to give anybody the opportunity to show me what they can do. So, again, I'm sure that somebody could point at some incident somewhere where maybe I hired somebody else first. But, my first hire on the show that I'm doing right now was a young woman that I've worked with before that has outworked most of the guys that I've hired. And that's why she keeps getting hired. She has stepped up. She's shown what she can do. And she works hard and does the job. So it's great for me when I look at it, and at least it feels like locations has been one area that has been able to give opportunities to people that maybe would not have been available to them in other departments. I haven't done a deep dive into the history of all these other departments and equality in those departments and whatnot. But
and you just really, for me, what I reflect on is for those. And I look at my mom, who was born in 1910, and I look at people born in that era or before, who could have probably been excellent at anything had they had the opportunities.
Yeah.
How many people were denied the opportunities, that I had, or, thank God, I got to see Gordon Parks do it, and that gave me the idea to want to do it. But
right.
just the lost lives of because we're talking about from 1865. How many generations of people is that until you just get to any area where you might be able to do something, and how many. And then still, with the masses of Black people and people of color who are still so much affected by the lack of education and poor housing and poor people dying in Flint from bad water.
Right.
And it's just not specific to Flint. That's any urban area because that lead is in those pipes. I'm talking about that specific thing, but who are entrenched in that circle of poverty still.
Sure.
Right.
It is such, and you think about the job that has to be done to bring people to a point that they're going to be at least at a 50% or 60% the level of the overall society. It's just mind-boggling. And I know in my lifetime, now that I'm the age that I am, I used to hear my mother say stuff like that. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. I can tell you that.
Right.
And but I can only do what I can do to propel it or help propel it, and make it. Even if it will happen in my kid's lifetime, that kind of thing.
Well, it's funny, Kokayi, because just like we're talking about, you were the first African American in the Teamsters out here, and as a location manager, and Dodd, you're talking about your mom and everything.
Right.
And my father was the first Black trustee on the board of trustees at Purdue University.
Oh, I had no idea. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and that was like a major thing. But you think about it in terms of the fact that he also, grew up with the Black seating section at the movie theater.
Oh,
like,
sure.
It's just sort of an interesting thing because you're excited about one piece of it, and we are very prideful in the fact that he was that person. Now they've had several Black trustees since he was on the board, but it was a big deal when he was named to that. But it's kind of like, it's crazy how we still are at a place where we actually count these things.
Right.
Yeah.
Where we still are like, oh, they finally got a Black person in, as head of this, or, that sort of thing. It's just, it's interesting that in 2020, we still are paying attention to all of that. And, we just formed this diversity and inclusion committee at the, the LMGI. Actually, Kokayi and I are both members of that committee. And so we're really carving out what it is that we're working toward as the body of, as that committee, to see what we're going to try to strive for the LMGI's representation. So it's just interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
I couldn't agree more. And that's, I talk about walking down the hallways of the University of Georgia Veterinary College, and you see all these pictures of men, and then a woman, and then men, and another woman, and then men, and my mom and her friend graduating. And, it's the best way that I can relate growing up the way that I did, and not having experienced it myself. But
and the thing you do know is that, we're noting, we got one, that how many were actually really qualified.
Sure.
And people say they weren't, but we know they were people who were qualified.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
I mean, you look at the writings of Frederick Douglass, and that's just one. You look at who was an escaped slave, right? But look at what he wrote at that time. I mean, it's just mind blowing, the stuff that he wrote and the way it was written. And anyway, I don't want to get onto that because I'll just go on to a whole nother tangent.
You'll be that guy in Minnesota.
I'll be that guy. I'll be back to that. Exactly.
Back to your roots. Yeah.
I'll be wanting to sit down for the Pledge of Allegiance now or something. There you go. Okay.
Yeah, before we get too far ahead, because I know I mentioned earlier, I wanted to bring us back to Gordon Parks for just a minute. So before I forget, let me ask. I don't know when exactly I became aware of his photography, but I love photography. I'm a little bit of a photography buff, but I wanted to know, the first opportunity I've had to talk to somebody that saw him work, knew him in any way. And it wasn't until much later that I became aware of his work in film. A lot of people talk about him being one of the early blaxploitation directors, and there's others that say blaxploitation is really not. It's an empowering
The
medium.
thing is, and I guess this is, I really was in the business since I had already, done a year on a TV series.
Right. Okay, that's
But
right.
the first thing I want to say is I hate that term blaxploitation, period.
Mm-hmm.
It was a black cinema, period. And it seems as though they lessen those films by not making it cinema. Second of all, that period saved Hollywood because people weren't going to movies, and a new audience was created because because those films reached a new audience. It held up the box until other shows could come along.
Right.
That's one. Gordon Parks, though, because he was born in Kansas, but he moved and lived with his sister in Minnesota. Who his sister was the mother of a friend of mine who we went through school together. And then I worked with her other son at this agency. Being around him was just great, because he would always call me Champ. That's what he called me. Well, Champ, what do you think about this? And da-da-da-da-da. And then getting to watch him work. And I remember on, I think it was Leadbelly, to watch him, and certain things him in an argument with the producer about something they couldn't have. And I mean, he was battling. This was, in the production office. And I was, not that he was the director, but that he was battling, with this person of authority from the studio. It's like they set my whole tone as to, yeah, you're there and we're happy we're there, but we don't have to take shit either.
Right.
And he didn't. Yeah. And,
right.
So, and we played tennis together. He was an avid tennis player, and we would play tennis and stuff like that. But you just sit in awe and watch him work and how he worked with people, and he was such a gentleman. And so, I mean, that's what it was for me. And it just, when we did Color Purple, he came down to do a still, I think, which is the poster of the still of Whoopi sitting in the chair.
Oh,
and he did this still. And I was the location manager, and I just was so happy that he could see that him investing his time in me got me to work on a feature film.
Yeah.
And I was there. So it was great. It was great.
Well, and that's kind of why we wanted to have this conversation, was to help, in whatever small way we can, doing this little podcast, raise awareness of the potential and the opportunities that do exist for anyone that, outside of the norm, what people think we do. And we like to talk about the collaborations we've had with people. And I think that draws people in and gets them interested in what the job is really all about. So, Alison, do you have a favorite collaboration or, like a location you brought to the table when you were working with someone specifically that illustrates the importance of your role in a production? Or, and I know we talked a little bit about Compton and that craziness, and I'm not sure that's exactly what I was thinking of. But
it's interesting. What I find, I can't really name something. I could say there's probably two of my more recent projects, which was A Wrinkle in Time, and then this one, The Underground Railroad. But I found that I had to stretch. A Wrinkle in Time didn't have that many locations, but every location required a lot of skill. It required a lot of negotiation and problem solving, and to, when Kokayi was speaking earlier about features and having the time, like I couldn't even possibly deal with it on the television series that I've done, because they everything's just so fast paced. But when you're on a feature, and granted, the Underground Railroad technically was television, but there was one director, and we were treating it, we shot it pretty much like a feature. But each location on those two projects required so much skill and problem solving and negotiation and thinking outside the box to get a lot of things done, whether it was just trying to, on A Wrinkle in Time, we were trying to film in an area that was partially owned by a private gun club, and trying to negotiate access and all of that with them was really interesting to me, or trying to get some LA Unified School District things done in the midst of Disney not having a deal in place with LA Unified, or the swamp work in Georgia, trying to figure out how to get out in the swamp and actually shoot it, or to I spent a lot of time on the Underground Railroad trying to figure out how to grow cotton.
Oh.
Because we wanted a cotton field at a time when it was the wrong season for cotton to grow.
Isn't that
and talking
typical?
to all these local farmers and everybody about cotton.
Right.
And so those sort of projects are the things that make me really appreciate what it is that we're doing as location managers. It's not always just like, oh, go find a house and just book it and pull a permit. But so much of the job is opportunity to, to think outside the box and
Absolutely.
come up with a way to pull something off that you've maybe never done before. That's the things I like. I don't know that I can, I'd have to go through my history and think of any other examples, but that's what comes to mind in answer to that question.
I think that's a great perspective that I don't think anybody else has brought to the table during these conversations. And I think that is a valuable aspect of what we do. There are a lot of that kind of thing that we do deal with outside the norm, for sure.
The one thing, and if I can quickly, for me, was working on Mars attacks. It was a huge, busy project that we shot in about 5 regions of the country. But one was a story issue. And there's a character Jim Brown plays. He plays a retired fighter who's a greeter at a casino in Vegas. Mm-hmm. And his wife and kids still live in D.C. And his whole thing in the whole movie is to get back to them. And Wynn Thomas, who was the production designer, who's an African-American production designer, and I read the script, and we talked about 2 scenes. While his character is in Vegas, his kids are starting to get into trouble and not going to school. And the wife is played by Pam Grier, and she's having a hard time controlling the 2 sons. Mm-hmm. What happens is that these kids are on a rooftop shooting a gun. We see them doing that. And then in the scene where they're escaping from Vegas, Jim Brown's character, they get a plane that's in a hangar. Tom Jones, the character, can fly the plane, but Jim Brown opens up the door and lets the plane go out, but then there's Martians out there, and he fights them, and he gets killed, and he's laid out on the tarmac as the plane gets away. So he paves the way for them to get away. So we have this production meeting. Tim Burton isn't in the meeting, but it's the producers and the department heads. We have this meeting, and so Wynn brings up the point about why do these kids have to be shooting guns? Why? Mm-hmm. The stereotypical thing that they're getting in the show. Why do they have to be shooting guns?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he brings that point up. And my thing is, the whole thing for Jim Brown's character in this film is to get back to Washington. So why does he sacrifice his life? And the producer says, "You mean for the white folks, right?" And I said, "Yeah. Why does he sacrifice his life and give up his whole goal and get back?" And somebody says, I think one of the other producers said, "Well, Tim is a fan of the films of the 50s, and this is done in those, and this is a kind of a tribute to those films." And I said, "Yeah, well, that's why we started making films in the 60s, so we could live to the end of the picture."
Right.
And so we get this place in D.C. So anyway, we shoot the scene up near what is the Howard Theater in that area in D.C. of the kids, and it turns out Pam Grier's character drives a bus, and she drives. And she pulls over to a stop, and she looks in a video arcade, and her kids are in there playing in an arcade. Now, they're shooting guns, but it's an arcade game. That's how they changed that to lessen that.
Oh, okay.
So that was one change. So we find this place that was partially torn down until they realized it was of historical significance, so they had to stop it. But the whole face of the place had been torn off of it. And we used it. We had to get structural engineer and all that. We used it as though the Martians had shot the building off. And we shot it, and the way it was written. And a month after we completed filming, I get a call from the producer saying, "Hey, we want to go back to that building, and we want to redo that scene." And we did the scene, and Jim Brown suddenly appears from around the back of the building.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I don't know. So the producer says to me when we're shooting it, he says, "Well, I guess you're happy now, huh?" And I said, "Yeah." He said it. And I don't know if they tested the film and other audience people reacted to why Jim Brown died or what happened. But I know that the producer remembered that conversation.
For sure.
And so when you talk about things that sway sometimes that when you look at a show and you see things that happen, that for me, for those two things, for the kids shooting in the arcade and for that Jim Brown reappearing, it turned out that I but I spoke to a group of young filmmakers who had won this contest, and they put together a seminar, and I came to talk about locations. And I told that story. And one of the kids who had won that contest says, hey, I played one of Jim Brown's kids, and I remember us having to go back and shoot that scene again.
Oh, really?
So and I guess, I can't think, what's Brandy's brother's name? Ray J? Ray J played the other son. He told me, Ray J was the other son, and I played the son. And I remember, I never knew why we went back. I said, now I know why we went back and shot that scene.
Wow.
Yeah.
And here I thought you were going to tell us how you really didn't find the tree for Shawshank Redemption.
Well, I didn't. My department did. I did all the negotiations for that. And that's like, Alison was saying, I had to learn about alfalfa so that I could compensate this farmer for not cutting his crops. I had to go and find out about how many cuttings you got in alfalfa and what it produced an acre and how much per acre was it. And then I had to give that farmer compensating him for not being able to cut his crop for 2 cuts of that summer. So we have to do a lot.
Yeah.
We have to do a lot.
Yeah. Well, and both of you have done a lot for us as a group, for the Location Managers Guild, for location managers everywhere, for women, for just for all of us, black, white, or otherwise. And I thank you for that. What else?
We do need to acknowledge, though, that Kokayi also was the first person named Location Manager of the Year.
Oh, I didn't even realize that.
At the California On Location Awards, and that he is a member of the Academy.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you reminded me to bring that up.
Just
want
to get all his accolades in there.
Yeah, and Kokayi, I know you weren't the first African American inducted into the Academy, but I do know you were one of the very, very first location managers that was voted into the Academy.
I was the second. Lori Bolton was the first. I was the second location. Yeah, second location person.
Well, explain what that means. For people. Again, for people that are outside the industry that are interested, and talk a little bit about what that means to you and some of the responsibilities you take on when you are voted into something like the Academy.
Well, ultimately, it means that you get to vote in the Academy Awards. That's ultimately that. And we're in the branch of the designer branch of the Academy. So we're in with production designers, set decorators, storyboard artists, illustrators, and prop people as well. And it's interesting because the film industry, and we talk about the film industry. We got to talk about Alison was talking about women and being an African American woman. I talk about being an African American man. The film industry is an institution like all institutions in America, and they are founded. Though great artistic people, but they're founded basically on a lot of racism. And we look at a lot of the early films, that came out and the stereotypes and stuff like that. But it's because of the change, and I think one of the best things that came out of last year's Academy Awards was the winner for Best Picture.
Mm-hmm. Parasite, yeah.
That it wasn't an American film; it was an international film, and it was a film about people of color. And I think a lot of that has to do with the makeup and the voting changes in terms of who's voting for the Academy Awards these days and how those numbers are changing.
Sure.
And that's one of the most inclusive things that's happened with the Academy. So the Academy itself is changing. I'm also on the committee at the Academy for the museum, and both representing the designer branch and the inclusion committee to make sure that the museum speaks to the inclusion of people in this industry and what our participation has been. And I'm on a committee for the A2020 about getting more people in the Academy who have the qualifications but may not have a chance to get in. So, that's that being, and then of course being able to get the screeners and get into screenings, is the icing on the cake. But
right.
It has helped, and it's an honor. It's an honor. Yes.
Well, it's certainly been an honor for me to get both of you together to have this conversation on this little project that I'm working on. And I thank you so much for doing that. You know, it's one of the fun aspects of this is I get to know people even better that I thought I knew pretty well. Alison and I had the opportunity to work together, and I learned a lot. And it's been great. And Kokayi, you know, I knew a little bit and never had the opportunity to work with you, but getting the chance to learn from you and hear some of your experiences has been fantastic. So thanks again. I mean, there's so much more we could talk about, but maybe we'll get together and do it again. But thanks again for making time.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's always my pleasure to be on with Kokayi, celebrate him. He's a trailblazer for us in this industry. So
she knows how proud I am of her. So there you go.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Locations on 2, the podcast about location management for film, television, and commercial projects around the world. Find out more by visiting locationson2.com. This is Dodd Vickers, your host for Locations on 2. You can find me online at doddvickers.com or any other social media. And Locations on 2 is brought to you by the Location Managers Guild International. Find out more about them by going to locationmanagers.org. Until next time, I'm back to one.